Welcome to Home Again. This podcast explores what changes inside you when you move to another country. And today I'm joined by Ivana, who moved from Serbia to Germany 19. And Ivana, I want to thank you for being here. And also just to let you know that there's no pressure to have perfect answers as we're speaking. This is a place for you to be able to just reflect on your own experience and to share your story of relocation. And so as we begin, well, let's start at the logical place, the beginning. Where did you move from? Where have you moved to? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi, Christopher. Good morning. It's really lovely being here with you and talking about the theme that is extremely important for me, which is change how moving to another country is influencing our identities. I'm from Serbia originally. I grew up in a central part of Serbia, like small town, I would say, famous for our vineyards. And then I moved to a capital for studies and lived there for half of my life. And then in 2019, I decided to change my life in a way and start over in another country. I moved to Germany. And I would say also what is very interesting and what for me is important to emphasize that one change is always or relatively often followed by different changes in our lives. So for example, when I moved here pretty soon after corona pandemic started, and after that I became a mom. So I would say all of these transitions influence how I perceived myself, and they are intertwined with a notion of what home is. And it feels to me that we are constantly moving. We are constantly moving from one place to another.
You mentioned there an interesting point that one change is often followed by many other changes. And that is definitely an experience that the listeners will hear echoed in other interviews that they listen to through the podcast series. And it's going to be one of the aspects that I've no doubt will be followed through again and again as I speak to you, because as we had interaction before in the notes that you filled in, there is definitely a lot of different change. You've hinted to some of that already. Becoming a mother, just being able to get into a new job, the pandemic, which affected so many people. But take me back to that point in your life when you decided to leave. What was happening in that moment?
I would say that I didn't consider the seriousness and the magnitude of change. I would say it started with me looking for a new job and being in a relatively small country market. A job market is relatively small. So basically, I was exploring different options, different companies that I could potentially join. And because market is not big, options were limited. And then I was trying to do some kind of experimentation and do in what if scenario. And I was like, okay, what if I expand my job search and include countries that I liked? And a couple of years before, I was visiting Berlin and I was meeting some nice people here. And I was thinking, Berlin is a nice place to explore and live. What if I could just check how it will go and check what are the job options there? It was 2019. It was different time than
Yeah,
today. The job
a
market
different world.
yeah, is much more brutal. But back then there was a lot of options here, so I applied for a couple of jobs here, and I applied for some other places that they also visited that I really liked, and I got two offers here, and I accepted one. And yeah, and I constantly was saying to myself, this is the experiment. This is just like let us see how it goes. The worst case scenario, I will come back in a 6 months with some experience. So that was my interpretation of the moment and back then. And of course, it was much harder than I expected. Cultural differences, just brutality of like the bureaucracy and finding the place to live. And once everything was sorted out, pandemic started. So yeah, I didn't have the time then to enjoy the me being settled in, because the next chapter of transition started.
Yes. What did you imagine life would look like once you arrived? So you've made that decision, a career was there, a job was taken.
Yes.
What was that gonna look like for you?
I will need to think about that. I think that in my mind, of course, we always, at least me, myself, when I think of the imagined future, it's always these glimpses of like pictures of me being on some like nice exhibition, meeting new people, maybe some dinner party, or like going out. It's always this like moments of extreme happiness and joy, and we connected. We are connected these moments of extreme happiness and joy with like specific images that are potent for us. And for me, were that like aesthetic experience, community experience, joy of like just being alive and moving your body. So I would say these are the moments that, like, if I think of how I imagine my life would be, that would be like something that I thought. Not so much about the career, and that moment of time I purposefully choose to, like, focus on specific part of my experience and not to like encompass everything that I did before, because of course moving and like new job market, and then just focus on specific segments. So I knew that in a way I needed some time to find my way professionally. Yeah. So that was a good decision, because even without that internal pressure, it was.
Yes. And so you had that very clear picture of what you felt it would look like, what you were hoping everything would unfold as. You've already mentioned that the reality looked a little different. There were unexpected changes, bureaucracy, housing, COVID, and that's the reality of a move. There's a lot of hidden things that suddenly crop up for us. And so at what point did the reality of what was happening around you, the reality of this move start to feel different from that picture that you initially had?
I would say I didn't consider how much psychological safety is important for example, doing your job well, for internal and external pressure, and how you deal with external and internal pressure. Because I remember when I arrived in like a new environment and the culture is different, I didn't feel safe. And of course, this is something that maybe now with the additional knowledge and with additional experience would um, deal with differently, and maybe seek a little bit more of like to hold myself uh, a bit more. But back then, I remember I was feeling very unsafe, and then that led into fawn response. It led to like questioning myself. It led to me not performing up to my abilities, and nobody prepared me for that.
Yes. And that's the part of the move is just these sudden changes that impact you and you're not prepared fully for the emotional outflow of what that's going to do. And I think that's an important part of this podcast for listeners is to be able to understand every move outside of the paperwork and all of the bureaucracy has an emotional toll that you need to be prepared for because everyone's going to respond emotionally in a different way. You're going to feel different. You're going to be impacted differently, and that's often what comes as one of the hidden surprises for us in the move. We don't expect that. You mentioned as well that cultural difference was something that early on became something which sort of surprised you, and that
Yeah.
culture shock as a surprise, what did that look like for you, particularly in the early weeks and months?
Yeah, I think that for me, of course, I don't know if I knew back then, or I was familiar with, or just, like heard about this culture map of like Erin Meyer and so on, and the research on this topic. But I remember that, like, coming from the more southern culture, there is this tendency of establishing warmth at the beginning. And also, I would say we are not that direct in, for example, feedback, and we are not that. I would say, of course, there is this huge authority difference. I would say that in Germany there is authority difference, but it's not that huge in terms of like respecting authority. And for me, that was pretty much shock. So me from coming from, for example, Southern culture and then expecting this kind of like warmth in initial contact, especially yeah, and then coming to like more northern, and then of course, there are other colleagues for coming from different cultures, but I'm talking about specifically coming to Germany in German environment, and there is this, I would say, distance and coldness, and of course directness as well. Coming at the beginning, it was a shock. Of course, me not being psychologically safe in psychologically safe space at a moment, I interpreted that as me not doing job well,
Yes.
and interpret it as me not fulfilling something that the other side in the conversation is asking for, and that was really tough. That was really tough.
It's such an interesting aspect because we don't think about the workplace cultural difference and the impact that has because you are within your home culture, you are conditioned and work in a specific worth ethos and ethic. And there's a culture that forms around that. And a lot of your work identity shapes around that and how you see and experience yourself. Suddenly, when you're transplanted into a work culture in a different country that does things so differently, has a stronger hierarchical structure or whatever it may be, that does come as a shock to the system and has you suddenly looking inside and questioning everything about you. And when that, as you mentioned, when that's not in a safe place, that can also lead to self doubt. And there's a whole lot that spirals from that. Certainly a very unexpected aspect of a move. Another part is if you had to look back, when we leave home, there's all of this change in the new context. What did you grieve that was back home that you didn't expect you would grieve?
I would say specific, of course, people and family, friendship, the relationships that I built, and that I was so proud of. The most treasured part of myself is the relationships that I have. This is the only thing that I'm truly proud of, and I'm proud of my friends and in my social circle. It took me like 30 something years to build this. And in a way, me being outside of this social circle obstructed, you know, me enjoying it. So that was one thing. And that was the most painful one. Of course, other are sounds and smells and tastes. I would say that there is like this very bodily sensations that are specific to each country and each environment that we are in, and I miss that. And also I miss the sun. I missed this 1 more hour of sun in winter.
Right. That's a big difference, isn't it?
It's not a big deal, of course, in summer. It's here. It's more sunny and it's nice. But in winter, day is 1 hour shorter. And I didn't know I would miss this 1 hour in the winter so much. Yeah, that was that was also something that I didn't prepare for.
Was there a moment when you specifically could feel the weight of being other when you were in Germany, that this wasn't where you naturally belonged?
Yeah, that is I would say not speaking the language. And at the beginning I joined a English speaking company, and it was expected from me to speak English, but German I started, like in anticipation of my move. I started learning German, but I
Yes.
didn't learn it in school. It was just very one level, so I couldn't understand most of the or all of things that were needed. And I remember relying on Google Translate and all of these options for navigating the life, and relying on other, and that was very very exhausting in a way. And I remember like applying for like a job, like a not job but a apartment, and then just like copying the message that like German colleague uh,
Yeah.
composed for me, and actually being able to adapt it to, for example, like specific application, because like maybe then the structure would be completely false or not good. So I remember, I would say othering for me was this connected with not being able to rely on myself, not like connected with lack of agency in a way, because of like my lack of German speaking knowledge.
And was there ever a moment that you genuinely questioned your decision to move to Germany?
No, I would say no, because I mentioned at one point I consider this to be an experiment in a way, and I was before pandemic. I was thinking, okay, this is just an experiment. The worst case scenario is me coming back home in 6 months or 3 months or 4 months, and it's just I'm just going to have a useful experience. I'm just going to have something that is valuable, or I will learn something about myself. For example, that I'm very fond of my culture, and this is the central part of my identity. After a while, life happened, and I didn't have the time, or other topics were more burning, so I didn't have the, in a way, time to consider I should come back or no. I would say that no. I would say that all of these I would say challenges showed me what I can do. And I'm proud of that.
Yeah. And it's so encouraging to have you be able to confidently say, no, there wasn't a moment that you felt that, because there's a total mix of people in these situations. Some do say yes, they doubted, they move, but there are people, as you were able to express, who saw themselves growing and maturing and being able to experience new things. And growth helped them to be able to move into new places that they didn't expect before. And so, because of that, able to say no, they didn't doubt it, no matter how difficult it is. And so, I think that's a word of encouragement for listeners: is that the difficulty can even take place within a framework that, well, as difficult as this is, it's a good place and there are options. And that's what's important. You mentioned, though, that unexpectedly, and it hit all of us unexpectedly, shortly after your move, just as you were settling, the pandemic arrived.
Yeah.
What did you do then? Obviously, things locked down, work would have looked different.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
didn't have a full community structure around you. So, what did that look like for you?
It was tough, but also unexpected. As for everyone else, I remember us all talking about unprecedented times. All of these emails started with unprecedented times, and this phrase is something that I would always connect with pandemic. And right now we are living out also in unprecedented times, but we are not using this term anymore. There is this, I would say, adaptation to the chaos in that we are living right now. So that is something that, yeah, for me is characteristic. And of course, now it's been 6 years plus. It feels like a distant memory, and also because of like a memory distortion, we are remembering this maybe funny or
Yeah.
uh, like silver lining like moments. I remember discovering joy of reading, and I remember I think that first couple of months I discovered this Elena Ferrante, My Brilliant Friend books trilogy, and I think that it saved me psychologically, because like I was working from home. And then I was really excited about finishing my work. So I
That's
continued.
what you could do next.
Yes. So I think that really is something that saved me, like, and in a way it is a story about the friendship, female friendship, and there is this kind of like historical setting, and there is this inner turmoil and growth in this story that is happening. And I was really like immersed so deeply. So I think that that was something that for me is how I would always associate, but I would always associate this initial months of pandemic. And I remember, like constant bargaining and constant, in a way, bargaining with myself, I mean, and constant, I think, no way, it's not going to last for 2 weeks. No, no ways, but before Easter, everything is going to go back and so on. And yeah, so I think that this first year, and I remember discovering also this like pockets of joy in my life that that are in a way important for me. I think that it was a time when I could actually think more about myself and my identity and my what brings me joy, and what is important to me more than ever before, because we did have that time for reflection. So of course, this is through like like pink glasses of memory distortion.
You mentioned, and this has been a thread through a lot of what you've said so far, that, well, in the pandemic, it was an opportunity for you to reflect on identity and the changes that were taking place. And it came through in your previous answer just about, did you ever question? And that all revolved around no, because it was shaping identity and growing that whole thing. This idea of identity and the internal shift is something that you've really experienced, and that's a reality of what moving context like this does. It causes you to go through an identity and an internal shift. What did you first notice beginning to shift for you as you moved?
I would say in boundaries. I would say I never think of like what being, for example, Serbian means. And you cannot even see it or feel it, notice inside of one culture. You can only see it or notice it once you're outside. And for me, that was something that I noticed first. For example, I consider myself not to be like very emotionally expressive in my own culture. But here, I would say that people would say, yeah, she is very, very emotionally
Interesting.
expressive.
Yes.
And I then, for example, noticed that like I use a lot of hyperbole, very, 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 very superbly, oh, complete disaster, and so on. All of these, I would say, extremes in a way how I express, how I perceive a reality. That is also something that is very characteristic for, very, very characteristic for
Yes.
my culture. And that is something that it learned to, in a way, tone down, but it seeps through still. But it is part of how I was brought up in a way. So that was the first thing that I noticed is like a kind of distinction of the culture. And then, for example, also notice that the similarities, like between cultures, and like who are the people that I would gravitate to in like social context. And I would say for some reason, even though like geographically extremely distant, Southern American people would be very close to, in a way, how we perceive the reality and how we expressed ourselves. So that was, for example, something that I didn't know before or I didn't think of. Yeah.
And did your beliefs change about yourself, about people, about life in general through this experience?
I think that through all of these changes, also moving through another country, another culture, surviving isolation and rebuilding social network, change in like values and what is important for me in terms of like becoming a mom and becoming a parent. The biggest shift in me is this value of human potential and humanity. Before all of it, I didn't consider resilience to be so something that is inherently in all of us, and that we can actually tap to it. I was thinking more of it as some kind of like quality metrics. You either have to a certain degree or you don't, and it's in a way fixed. And all of these changes taught me that we as humans are resilient, and there is value in each and every person. And this is something that before I didn't consider, didn't think of, and that is the biggest change. I would say that only through all of these changes and finding home and defining what home is for me, I could call myself truly humanist. Before that, I didn't consider that to be one of the values.
That's such a beautiful phrase. Just we are resilient, and that each person has that same value and resilience, just to be able to hold on to that. I can see in my own journey just that reality growing of how this mixture of community, mixture of different people from different groups, each adds a unique flavor to my experience and my life. And that just highlights for us that value that each person carries. It's just an important uh, thought to hold on to in this. Look for the uniqueness that's around you, because that's a beautiful experience that you get through relocation. You've already mentioned that family and relationships were key to you and are key to you, that you're proud of the relationships that you built. Part of your move into new contexts often bring about changes in relationship and your sense of belonging. How
Yes.
did this move affect the relationships that were closest to you?
I, of course, there were, I think that I relied on my closest relationship very much, and I'm grateful that I had them. Of course, the quality and in the way how we communicated changed a lot from being able to talk and hold each other in person to being relied upon phone or on the internet, and that was a big shift in a way. I remember missing my best friend and my parents, my sister so much, and of course there was not a day that I didn't speak with them. So I was very grateful that I have that, and I think that it in a way enabled me to build my life here. So I think that I drew from the closest relationship so much in order to build the new ones. I really hope that I didn't strain these relationship too much, and I hope, and I hope every day that they are as strong as they would be if I stayed. Of course, it's very hard to measure something like that, and I don't think that we should measure
Yeah,
like
that's right.
difficult. But yeah, I think that that was also my way to like build my life here, knowing that I have
That's
this
right.
kind of strong relationship.
And did any relationships change more than you expected, either fading or becoming something stronger than they were before?
I would say, uh, yeah, I would say that we have this kind of strong ties and weak ties in our social circle. I think that with this kind of pressure, strong ties became stronger because of this kind of like they got in a way galvanized, and weak ties became weaker. So this is something that in a way how different relationship are behaving in a way that yeah that there is this kind of difference in quality, but of course all of it is as valuable, and of course it can be, for example, for weak ties that are broken, I have this feeling and I know for certain that they can be rebuilt. So that is how it changed. So some got really strong, for example, with my sister, with my best friend, and some got in a way obstructed, but not for forever. I mean, just consider it to be, for example, interlude.
Yeah. And a big part of that, you mentioned these strong ties. A big part of the strong ties is when there's a shift in context, like moving to a new country, you need to become a lot more deliberate in how
Yes,
you communicate and interact with people.
exactly.
But the strong ties are the ones that realize on their side, they also need to become more deliberate. And so
Yes.
when both are deliberate, that's when often you find it strengthening. It's when either one of those two aren't deliberate that that's probably one of the weaker ties that things fall away, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that relationship's gone.
No, no, no.
That's it. It's just that it can't sustain the distance at that moment.
Exactly. Yeah,
And it's
exactly.
expected. I
Very
think
well
a
said.
lot of people come and move and they don't quite realize the degree to which
Mm,
distance affects relationships or changes the way communication happens within them.
mm,
And so just that understanding that you need to commit to being more deliberate to maintain and grow those.
exactly.
Ivana, when did you first feel a sense of belonging in Germany? And was that connected to a person or a place or a specific moment, maybe?
When first felt connected, I think that it started with me being connected to, for example, my home. It started from like small physical place. I started building my apartment, buying furniture and decorating in a way to reflect myself and feeling very comfortable in that place. So it started from small physical place, but has that kind of physical basis. And then it grew and it grew. And then I remember doing this morning walks. This was spring 2020. It was a really beautiful spring. Of course, we could not meet many people. And of course, I didn't even want to because I didn't want to expose other people potentially. But I remember just looking at this beautiful blue sky and taking pictures of this neighborhood. I was living in like this part of Berlin called Weissensee with a really nice small lake. And then I would go around the lake and just enjoy the nature and some ducks and like seeing flowers and plants. And I would say this connection with nature, connection with physical environment helped me feel like home. I would say this is my experience, probably influenced by context that I was in. But I would say that, building from the space to feel very comfortable, to be by your liking, to be a reflection of you, and then slowly growing and growing, growing to
Yes.
encompass more.
And I suppose a big part of that is that space as it reflects you, as it becomes your zone, also becomes a place of safety. And it's
Yes.
easier when you know there's a place of safety to retreat to begin to engage broader and to start interacting outside of that.
Yes.
You've previously mentioned that rebuilding a community after a big move is something you feel is important to share. What
Yes.
does that process actually look like for you?
This was a really good opportunity to think of my identity and think of how do we actually build our community. And I would say the easiest way is always to think of your values and think of basically your identity. What are like, I would say, the cornerstones? Some of them, most of them they need to be shared in order for you to find your people, your community. So for me, it can be, like very easy national identity. It can be your interest. It can be being a mom or a parent or any other segments that are resonating with us dramatically. And I started from that. Back then, I was not a parent, but for me, it was, of course, very easy to connect with people who also moved to Berlin, maybe in the similar time. I connected with feminists very easily. That is also one of my core values. And of course, with my national identity because of all of these cultural differences. And I would say, they would not misinterpret some of my like way of expressing myself. So I would say that that was always the easiest part to identify, and then basically to like reverse engineer how, because it was needed to in a way be very deliberate in terms of building your community.
Yes.
and there was no many options in terms of like spontaneously meeting people and so on. So basically, what I did, I reached out to some of my friends back home and asked if they know somebody who is also here.
Yes. That's a brilliant way to do it, though.
Yes, I started like that because this was the zone that I felt safe with. And then, in a way, that the social circle grew and grew and grew. Yeah. But I defined what is important for me. But basically, my value is how somebody recognized something similar to me and then started from that.
Yes.
Some
And
other people can, connect with the music or something.
that's right.
Yeah. For me,
And
it
the
was,
importance behind that is that it creates a context for you to be able to feel less isolated and aids in being able to create that sense of belonging. As soon as you've got a community around you, because we're made for being in community as people.
yes.
So for people doing this move, it's being able to find a space where you have a community of whatever size you're able to, even if it's one other person that's in the same space as you, move wise or interest wise, that cannot resolve everything for you, but can be a cheerleader for you, can be a sounding board for you, just so you don't feel alone physically in these things. And I think often people try and push through on their own without that support.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes we think of, for example, investing some time building new relationships or finding our people as one more task to do, and we are already tired, like thinking, "Oh, I just need to lay down and like binge watch something, and or, scroll on my phone." And I think that is actually depleting us. Yeah.
But you mentioned something that's so helpful because when you get older, building new relationships and friendships is not easy. But what you mentioned is so helpful starting points. Make a list of your interests and look at that.
Yes.
Your idea of calling back home and asking, do you know of anybody who's moved into this area that I can interact with? So that you've got that national identity in common
Yes.
to be able
Yeah.
to have those are helpful aspects, particularly as you start getting older when it does become more difficult. It's looking for those opportunities. Looking at your life now, Ivana, who are you now that you were not before this move?
Of course, now I'm a mom, and I would say that this is a big part of my identity. And who knows how that pan out without me moving here. It's as we mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, changes are always intertwined, and it's very hard to distinguish one from another. Everything is moving in our lives. So I'm more humanist than before. I believe in human value and I believe in human potential much more. I do not consider like some particular traits that we might or might not have as a gift, but more as a skill, something that we can develop. I use that in my everyday life in terms of how I think of future right now, how I raise my kids, how I approach my relationships, and there is much more agency. I would say agency was first to go when I moved and was strengthened the most with the move.
And what has relocation taught you about yourself that you couldn't have learned another way?
That I'm brave. That I'm brave and that I'm willing to take risks.
Now, Ivana, part of my work as a life coach and at Bravely Me is to create a space for people just to tell their stories, to build their stories, because where we've come from often shapes our thinking and then the story going forward. And part of every story, as you'd know from reading yourself, is chapters have titles.
Yes.
If you were to give this chapter of your life a title, what would that title be and why?
Yeah, I would say it will be mattresses slash permanently under construction on purpose. And why? Mattresses is this term that I didn't know before about neuroplasticity and how our brain is changing through the process of childbearing. And I experienced that firsthand, and it is most dramatic change that, and it's something that I didn't expect to be so dramatic, but it is. I feel like, in a way, like my brain changed so much, the way how I see the world, my values, everything is I felt at the beginning as I have sunburn on my brain, and now it's changing. Still, why permanently under construction on purpose? Because in a way, I accepted that and I desire to change myself for the rest of my life. I want to grow. I want to develop myself. I want to be able to encompass new experiences, new people, learn new things for the rest of my life. And I know that I'll never be perfect and I would never be finished. And when I'm finished, I'm potentially probably dead. So I want to be this, I know that, like it is image that is not pleasant. For example, is like under construction in the buildings that are constantly covered with this plaster and this, sheets of plastic. Yes. But I want to be like that um, for the rest of my life. I want to be able to and be flexible enough to adapt to new environments and to build myself. Because once we become rigid, once we are in a way know it all and do not question ourselves, then I don't see how we can actually grow.
Indeed. And if you were to speak to somebody listening who's at the start of a move like this or thinking about it maybe, what would you want them to understand or what encouragement may you have for them?
Yeah. So I have a couple of advices. First, for me, what was very useful is to consider this kind of like small experiment. Do not consider any change is not life shattering. It's life changing, but it's not life shattering. And it can be used we can interpret it as you know, this is an experimentation for limited time, and you can actually define your like experimentation zone. What are you experimenting on, and start from that helped me in a way be myself, and also preserved me throughout this challenging process. Second thing is find your own safety zone. It can be home, it can be people, it can be physical place, it can be specific movement of your body, routines that you have, nature. So find your safe zone and build from it. And third is of course importance of community, and do not rely only on or expect other people to reach out. There is this agency that can only be useful when it's both ways, as we talk. So be mindful and purposeful in terms of building your community. So those three things are, for me, most important, and something that I will continue using in my ever-changing life.
Ivana, thank you so much. There's obviously so much more that we could speak about in your story, as with many others. But thank you for sharing so honestly and openly with us. And if you're listening and something in this conversation stayed with you, you are not alone in that. These experiences are often quieter than people expect, but every single one of them shape how we see ourselves, how we see the people closest to us, and what belonging actually means. Home Again is part of Bravely Me, a practice supporting people through life's transitions, identity shifts, and relationship change. And if you'd like to explore your own experience more deeply, you can find more at bravelyme.eu. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next episode.